let's have a look here. We've got. All right. Well, tell us a little bit about the area and the intersection there, just from a general perspective, and then we'll get into breaking up by exposure, likelihood, and severity.
Okay. So Lowe's Road is the main thoroughfare. That's the one that sort of runs left to right, I suppose.
Yeah.
There we go. And that's the main thoroughfare. I think I worked out that had sort of about 3,500 cars a day. East Madison's is the one that's got 2 stops. I think it's about 2,500 cars a day. There's a recreational park just up the road, Brookside Park. West Rolleston Primary is not too far away on Dunn's Crossing Road, up the other way. And then there's Rolleston College. It gets quite a bit of pedestrian thoroughfare.
Okay.
There's no I guess the crossing points are fairly close to the intersection itself. Speed limit's 50. Predominantly Lowe's Road. There'll be a lot of cars that do probably in excess of around 60. Although I think the mean speeds, when I looked at the data on it, were sort of about 48 kilometers an hour, I think. The median speed. Yeah.
Okay. And so here we are having a little street view look at it. Really straight in both directions. Looks like they've doubled up stop signs.
Yeah, where it says stop, that should probably say rolling stop, because that's what so many people seem to do through it. So.
Okay, and what do you got, a shared user path on here?
Yep.
Which is kind of footpathy, but yeah, okay.
There's the open water race, and then there's the sort of the trees and stuff which block a little bit of visibility traveling on Lowe's Road from the other end, but it's not too bad.
Okay, yeah. Okay. All right. Well, let's work through this systematically, and we'll start with exposure. So, what were you thinking when you were scratching your head and looking at this intersection and thinking about exposure to crashes?
I haven't got a printout of it. Conflict angles, impact angles, the speed, the vulnerable user volume and traffic volume.
Okay, so those last ones are really what we look at in a safe system assessment in terms of narrowing it down to exposure, sort of the numbers of users going through this intersection in one way or another. So some of those other ones we'll come back to in some of the other categories. So you said there's about 3,000 vehicles a day on Lowe's and probably less on the other, I would assume.
Yep.
And any idea for the number of cyclists or pedestrians that cross in the vicinity of this intersection?
Not sure, sorry, but it's predominantly school kids, either primary school or high school.
Okay.
So obviously just in those sort of high peak time zones for the kids going to and from schools.
Okay. And have we got major sort of destinations that they're origin destination Lowe's Road, or are they sort of just using it as a cut through to residential areas, or are they? Oh, let's zoom out.
Yeah. What do they call it? Is it a main collector or something like that?
Yeah. Right.
It's one of your primary sort of roads through.
Yeah. Okay. So you've got what is that, State Highway 1 up there?
Yep.
So running parallel with it, but yeah, quite a distance out. Okay, interesting. Okay, so yeah, I mean, in a safe system assessment, and you'll see this after after the end of next module, where we give you actual safe system assessment assignment, and we start to really break this down and use a safe system assessment matrix to be able to score things. It's a little bit more obvious what we mean by exposure, because you're just actually trying to predict or estimate or use existing data on the number of vehicles, the number of pedestrians, the number of cyclists, the number of motorcyclists. So it really just comes down to those volumes as such. I mean, it might have been easier if they just said volume times likelihood times severity to avoid some of the confusion in the use of the word exposure in the past around road safety. But yeah, okay, that's given us an idea on exposure. Let's talk about likelihood. What are some of the things here that you thought might increase the chance that a crash is going to happen, the likelihood of a crash? And you already mentioned a couple of things, I think.
Yeah, sorry. So yep, the conflict angles, driver behavior with the rolling stops. Increased speed. I was going to say a confusion for the kids, but to be fair, they probably look for bigger gaps in the drivers. But with so many turning vehicles from different directions, you quite often see them standing on the footpath for quite some time until there's almost nothing in sight so they can cross. So kids obviously find it fairly confusing to get across.
Yeah, right. Okay, there's some good things there. So you mentioned conflict angles, and that really usually sits in the severity column in a safe system assessment, because we're thinking there about the sort of physics of it and how bad the crash is going to be. Where angles do come into play associated with likelihood is where you have these skewed entry angles and things which make it hard for a driver to be able to look. So if this had come in at quite an angle and the driver really had to crank their head around, those sort of things can influence the likelihood of crash. But predominantly in the safe system assessment, we're thinking about conflict angles associated with how bad the crash is going to be, so more the severity. But your ones about like the rolling stops, a good one. So the behavior and the nature of this somehow is that people are not actually really stopping there. So that may increase the likelihood of crash. We have just the, I suppose, control of this intersection using passive control. So stop signs rather than traffic signals or roundabout or something with a bit more, I suppose, substance to it, has some level of increase in the likelihood of crash. Where there's a whole lot of things associated with other crash types that we can think about. So runoff road crashes. So the presence of roadside hazards, like these lighting columns, the trees along the side and the fence there, all increasing the, I suppose, likelihood of a runoff road crash because there's things to hit. Now, the severity of the runoff road crash is where we start to analyze those things that are there to be hit, like these light poles, and saying, are they frangible? Are they going to break away on impact, or are they rigid? They look rigid to me. But the distance they are offset and the distance our hazards are offset, that's a likelihood factor. So the straight alignment to this has sort of pros and cons, I suppose. The advantage being that it is squared up, and there's it shouldn't be too hard for people to look as they approach the intersection from these side roads and be able to see up both ways. The disadvantages come in, I suppose, a couple of forms. One being, well, we'll get to severity, and you've rightly picked out angle of impact of as an issue. You do get a slight reduction in, a bit of an increase in likelihood here, just due to that straight cross alignment. I mean, nobody's having to deviate out of their straight line. And on the approach here from this East Madison, I'll go back a little bit, even though it's sort of a residential area, but you can just see the straight through, see-through run. The presence of the splitter islands here actually will have done a nice job in stopping overshoot crashes. So people are unlikely, though, to run through this after the installation of this, which would have been no doubt a retrofit at some point. I don't know, Mike, if you know how long you've known this intersection, but at some point somebody would have decided to add that in to, I would guess, lessen the amount of people overshooting this and give them a position to put the stop, and provides a nice little refuge for a pedestrian crossing as well. Lighting, that's going to reduce the likelihood of crashes. It looks like it would be well lit. We do have, I suppose, crossing points for pedestrians, so that has some advantage. I think we'll get into some of the challenges for pedestrians in the next, when we talk about severity. Let's jump to talking about severity. I mean, I could go on and on about different likelihood factors, and some of them are more influential than others. But we have, we have pretty well line marked. We have a decent surface. We've got some, decent signage. Maybe we could do some advanced warning sign depending on what we're thinking. But let's go to severity. What do you think is influencing the severity of the crashes here, Mike? You still got your mic?
Mike, you're a bit faint there.
Speed and angles.
Oh, yeah, there you are. Yeah, good. Speed and angles. Well said. Speed and angles, they're a big one for passenger vehicle to passenger vehicle crashes. And you really did a good job of mentioning that conflict angle. So we've got that pretty much right angle crash possibility, as this vehicle either goes straight across or does their right turn out here. We've got the potential for that direct right angle. We also have vehicles making their turn in and fairly exposed to a right angle crash as well. So, and there are kind of most severe passenger vehicle to passenger vehicle crash angles. So we've got that. I talked already about, we've got fixed roadside hazards. Now, you may weight this more or less depending on operating speeds there and what you feel the chance, well, how people are going to leave the road. Once you're into severity, you assume people are crashing. Okay, you've got to get your mind set in that. Now, as they leave the road and they're crashing, you've got to sort of think about what speeds they're doing that, what angles they're doing that, and how severe the crashes might be. And you think about the frangibility of any poles or posts or the like, or trees for passenger vehicles. But let's talk about pedestrians. What do you think is influencing the severity of crash for pedestrians trying to cross here? We talked about the kids trying to cross and some challenges they may have in terms of the complexity of it. But let's now think about a crash is happening. What's influencing how bad that crash is going to be?
speed, I guess, and potentially the location of the crossing point to the actual intersections. You're getting kids crossing between sort of vehicles into sort of coming out from an unseen position.
Yeah, right. So speed, the big one, absolutely. So speed is what we're thinking about for that crossing one. It is interesting, yeah, as you say, setback here, where you have a vehicle, one or even possibly two vehicles propping here, and then some more back here, and the kids sort of, filtering their way through here, or people trying to cross and filter their way through. That's more a likelihood factor because the queuing and that, rather than a severity factor. The severity is still just the speed that would happen. And which in that case would probably be low, and so we'd expect low severity. It gets a little bit complicated in some of these scenarios of people backing out and these low speed. And if we think about, trucks that may not be able to see kids and rolling over, it's a sort of different crash mechanic to think about rather than the what we've been talking a lot about, which is that impact that the human body can handle. But really it's speed is going to be the key one there, and thinking about the speed at the crossing points or where there's likely to be a lot of crossing. Cyclists, we don't forget them as well. And, you've got, we would take I suppose a realistic look at this area in terms of a safe system assessment and think about, well, we're going to have some cyclists will use this shared facility, but I dare say some would be using the large shoulder area that is provided here. And so likelihood would probably be influenced by the fact that, some are using that, some are using this. Of course, we get to the points where roads have to be crossed, and that's obviously going to be an increased chance of crash for a cyclist just trying to navigate their way through here, either from the shoulder area or on the bike path, and then crossing and having those same challenges. Severity will be influenced by the speed then of vehicles predominantly. So what did you think then, Mike, that possibly could be altered at this intersection to lessen the exposure, the likelihood, and the severity, or the severity?
For the exposure, I put in an offset intersection, although sort of got a comment back about a compact roundabout. I guess I just did that because I sort of know how many of these intersections we've got, and I just sort of thought that would be cheaper. I know it's not necessarily the best option, but I sort of wonder about sort of cost for putting in compact roundabouts at all our intersections that are laid out like this, which is a fair few of them. I put raised platforms for raised crossing platforms and speed limit reductions.
Okay, so let's unpack some of that. So offsetting the intersection. So just for those who are trying to get their head around, what does that actually mean? That instead of down this way, it's only going to give me this direction. Instead of having this as a sort of straight across, we would slightly offset one road and offset the other, so you don't get that straight sort of look through. Now, that will reduce the likelihood of crashes. That's a likelihood factor. We're not going to, by doing that, we're not going to change the volume of vehicles going through here, the volume of pedestrians, the volume of cyclists, or the like. We're simply hoping that it'll make it less likely that a crash will happen. It's not going to influence the severity of crashes either, because we're still dealing with right angle crash potential. We're still dealing with pedestrians and the like. So now, interestingly on this one, my sort of, without getting out there and watching and really getting a feel for it, I'm feeling that overshoot crashes are maybe not going to be the issue here. Really that presence of Splitter Island, the narrowing down, I feel has done an effect. And we would tend to stagger an intersection like that if we're concerned with people not realizing the intersection is there, thinking that their road continues on, and they're too late and they enter the intersection. But yeah, it's all, you know the area really well, so it may be something that's got to be dealt with. The attraction of the compact roundabout at this location is the fact that it would reduce the severity of crashes. Now, we will talk shortly about Mike's really valid point about, well, how many tens of thousands of these intersections have we got across New Zealand that would need to be treated and the like. But certainly the idea of a roundabout of some description disrupts this ultimate priority we talked about. So that lessens the likelihood to a degree of crash. So these vehicles coming through here, they'll hardly be thinking about these vehicles on the side roads. And we'd like them to always, increase their alertness as vehicles are coming out there. But unfortunately, they kind of just drive along straight, sort of tuned out. If we had something in the middle there to disrupt that continuous straight flow for them, they would wake up, they'd look around, they'd slow down. We'd have that in, and so there's a bit of likelihood reduction there. We might get some increase in rear end type minor crashes, but reduction in the likelihood of crash from that perspective. And then when those crashes happen, they're just going to be lower speed and better angles. There is a bit of pavement area here to play with. So the idea of the compact roundabout may not be, as expensive. Well, yeah, trying to fit something in there with some mountable areas for larger vehicles to still make some turns, I think is a reasonable possibility. But you kind of want to scale back and think about it a little strategically, don't you? Of thinking, well, this is a pretty major road in the scheme of the immediate surrounds, and there and there. Could we start to, divert some of these other roads somehow into these areas and use that as a central point? And you might need, another one or two there. Has that one already got a roundabout? No, it's signalized. Okay. But yeah, a little bit of sort of strategic, where can you dot these out that give some benefit, that maybe also disrupt the continuous straight flow. But the idea is there to slow that bullet vehicle, the bullet vehicle that's coming through there. Is that vehicle parked or is it just using the lane? Anyway, is where we're going to get some reductions in the severity of crashes. Now, thinking about pedestrians crossing at this location, and how can we, improve it from either exposure, likelihood, or severity. Exposure is going to be pretty hard unless we start to do some very, very expensive and, I suppose, out of context stuff like grade separation, underpasses, or the like. I mean, that's how you would alter that. Or you actively try to stop people crossing, which we don't want to do. We want to, encourage active transport and people walking and cycling rather than trying to stop that. But we could reduce exposure by blocking off some of these roads if we didn't want to, for passenger vehicles, and having them go around the other way, so that there would be a continuous crossing point for pedestrians. But in terms of then severity, raising these crossing points, it makes at least that crossing maneuver much less severe if an incident was to happen, because people will slow as they get to these points. If you provide that priority, you could reduce the likelihood of that crash as well. You do have a nice existing setback, so vehicles have enough room to prop at these locations. So those continuous priority for pedestrians and cyclists is certainly a possibility. at these locations, as I think you were talking about there, Mike. So some good opportunity there. And then, raised intersections can provide just almost a local area traffic management type feel to these areas that are a bit more collector roadish. So, traditionally we may not have thought of ever putting, local area traffic management on a route like this. But I think that's because we maybe only thought about particular ramp grades and the like that are, really slow vehicles significantly down. But I think you could do some raised intersections at these locations that would just dampen speed, dampen that straight run, and reduce the likelihood and severity of crash. But yeah, no, I think your point is a good one, Mike, about, well, how many of these are out there? And I think we need to sort of get our head around what's good practice at these, and then have some sort of prioritization mechanism to decide where and how we start to deploy these changes. And we're going to have some substantial changes, things like roundabouts or compact roundabouts. We're going to have some lesser ones where we might be looking at, as you said, speed limit reductions, different threshold treatments on side roads, blocking off some of these. And so just continually rolling out stuff that we know has good alignment with safe system principles. Any other comments on this one, Mike? You've done a good job.
No, that's pretty good, thank you. I just saw Joe's comment on the side with the cost of their ones. That's good.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I haven't seen that. 500K. Yeah, that's pretty good. I can show you. I might even do that briefly. Just some really low cost, roundabout, compact roundabout style treatments, and certainly, I mean, maybe not this particular location being appropriate, but in some of those next order down type areas, you can do incredibly cheap roundabout style treatments. Dunedin's done quite a few of them. Some of you would have seen that. Their ones, they're not, super long lasting as a concrete roundabout would be, but they're from the perspective of deploying heaps of them quickly and really utilize, lowering speeds in some of these areas, they're pretty good.
I think that's the key, because like it or not, when you start dealing with local government and ratepayers, it all comes down to the almighty dollar.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. And so we do need to look at ways to do this cheaper. Stop sharing there. Well, thank you, Mike. That's a really good one there. Kathy, you still there?
Yes, I am.
I'm just sorry.
No, that's okay.
I'm just bringing something up on my screen. There was a bit of commentary in the chat. I'm just going to show everybody out of interest. We just started talking about compact roundabouts. There's a really interesting compact roundabout that we evaluated in Mildura, and it's not, I mean, the road is it's different to what we were just looking at, but it's not that different to a degree. And this cost $40,000 to implement. Now, yeah, they had the pavement width and the like, but it's just just grab the report quickly. Because I got some pictures in the report, the evaluation report of sorry, just going down to the construction section. Incredibly effective, but you can see there's a concreted, infilled, and they used some of the concreting. But they used didn't quite get the angles that they want. You can see it's still almost a straight run through, but you can see there the use of speed cushions to slow speeds on the approach. And it was a really quite an effective that you can see it's quite effective from that perspective. Is it right for that road environment? Well, probably not quite right, but I think the general theory is good, and the fact that we can do this in an incredibly low cost way is pretty exciting. Anyway.
Nice little segue there, Ken. There's also a comment, would it be important to have warning directional indicators for vision impaired pedestrians at Mike's intersection?
So I think there's a lot of stuff to have a think about in that, catering for all road user space. I think it's more than just that. Thinking holistically about that. From a safe system assessment perspective, we kind of think about, is that going to significantly increase the likelihood of death and serious injury at that location? So I have this weird way of dividing this up, and it's never that I feel that is not an important thing to think about, but in a safe system assessment, for me, I go, well, how many deaths and serious injuries are we seeing in New Zealand associated with vision impaired people not having the correct information to cross an intersection? And it is very small. But by no means does that say that it's not important for us to get that right, if that makes sense. But that to me is a sort of, because now we're putting other important transport considerations and wedging them into safe system assessments. And that's an accessibility, an equity thing, right? Because then you go, well, what about environmental issues? And do we need to consider what is the best for climate, impacts? So then you start to wedge in that issue, and then you start to, say, well, what's the cultural heritage impacts of that, and which is the best? You wedge that issue in, and then you start to get on to, and you can end up like growing this thing to something that is a holistic transport impact of this intersection and changes to this intersection. So you really have to draw your boundaries and say, well, we are here to assess safe system alignment, right? And if that particular thing is going to significantly increase the amount of death and serious injury at this intersection, or has the ability to reduce it, then we have that in our safe system assessment. If it's something that we go, well, that's just good practice and an important societal thing for us to do, you go, okay, well, I'm sure the project team and the project manager and the project designer are going to be working on that. It's not our role as safe system assessors to do that. Now, some people find it hard to, draw that definitive line, and they are blurred areas, but you'll find you just don't know where to stop, and you become like a holistic project assessor.
Well,
Okay.
thank you, Ken. And just a comment in there from Axel as well, with regards to your comment of not likely to miss the intersection because of a splitter island. He wants changed an intersection so that it shouldn't happen any longer. Just the other week, a signboard here got flattened by someone who missed it and didn't recognise the intersection. And that happened at my local school as well. As soon as they put the splitter island in with the tiny little, board telling people to go that way. Yeah. But I think it takes a while for people to get used to the splitter island being there, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right. There's generally they are a pretty highly effective treatment in reducing overshoot crashes. Now we might see some people doing maneuvering issues, swept path of larger vehicles, flattening keep left signs. That's a very common thing to happen. Usually that's the other one, the front one. So it's not, that's because a large vehicle tries to turn. You would have noticed that at Mike's intersection there, these splitter islands were set back a little bit. And that's so that larger vehicle can sweep in without crushing all of the signage that we put on those. But that is a highly effective treatment for stopping overshoot. It doesn't do anything for the severity, as we talked about, though. You've still got that. And like any intersection treatment, you're going to still have some people missing it. They're doing things that humans do, like texting and eating their Big Mac and miss it, and then all of a sudden they're on top of the island. Okay, Kathy. Any other comments coming in while I share my slides?
I think we're good for the moment.
How are we going on time here? Oh, we've had a good chat. So I will cover off a little bit of content now. We'll give you a break, and hopefully we'll give you a bit of time at the end of this session to catch up on any quizzes or the assignment, and we'll get you ready, because next session we're going to give you all of the information you need to go out and do that mock safe system assessment, the actual process. So generally people were pretty good. At understanding how to attribute likelihood and severity. There was still confusion around this exposure from a lot of people, and that's understandable, as I mentioned. But think of exposure as numbers. Think of it as numbers. And this will become far more obvious once you use a safe system assessment matrix. But we sort of wanted to inch you into that idea of using a safe system assessment matrix, because dropping you sort of right in there is a bit overwhelming. So if we have an intersection, for example, and we've got, a volume of traffic coming this way and a volume of traffic coming this way, the addition of those two volumes of traffic is the exposure to intersection crashes. Okay, it's just the numbers. It doesn't matter how this is controlled. This intersection is controlled, whether it's a roundabout, whether it's a signalized roundabout, whether it's a raised intersection, whether it's just the numbers, the number of vehicles entering that intersection. It's the number of pedestrians crossing. That's our exposure there, and the number of cyclists, the number of motorcyclists and the like. It's numbers. Now, the other tricky one, and I did sort of touch on this, but it might have, slipped past a few people because you're still getting your head around all of this. If we have a road and we have pedestrian crossing the road, if we do curb build outs, we lessen the distance that the pedestrians have to cross, right? But that reduces the likelihood of crash in a safe system assessment. A lot of people want to make that an exposure, reduction in exposure, because there's less distance, thus they're exposed for less. But simply under a safe system assessment, that is likelihood. And that one needed a lot of debate and clarification. But the idea was that we couldn't double count exposure, because exposure was about how many pedestrians were crossing, right? And the likelihood is what is the chance that they get hit. So the distance that they're out there at the time that they're out there was a likelihood factor. So hopefully that helps a little bit. We do have some fact sheets that are available. Actually, I'll show you a picture of those shortly that can help with a little bit of this as you keep going. But don't worry if you got some of this wrong in this assignment. I mean, the whole purpose of that assignment is to really start you getting a bit of calibration in your thinking. You have multiple attempts at it, so you can do that, and it'll help you significantly with the next one. But you can see there, I mean, removing a conflict point, so blocking off a road, an intersection, a conflict point is one way to alter exposure, or that physical separation we talked about, having it so, vehicles are up there and pedestrians and cyclists down there means that they're, that conflict is no longer there. They're not exposed to crashes. And some definitions are available in the Austroad Safe System Assessment Framework documentation. And, it talks about exposure refers to which road users, so in what numbers they are exposed to a potential crash. Now, this how long they are using the road is sort of this blurred, ambiguous one that has really been eliminated in the jurisdictional supplements, and that was one that played out during lots of industry and working group discussions around this. Sort of put in there as a bit of a line that nobody quite thought about too much when Austroads released that initial document. But exposure includes AADT, side road traffic volumes, number of motorcyclists, cyclists and pedestrians crossing or walking along the road. That's the key. And the key is, the numbers. And so, as I mentioned there has been a few things that are either not written into the Austroads document, they have not been clarified by different jurisdictional supplements or the like, or they're just unclear in all of that. And so we started producing these fact sheets for people to get some clarity around some of those and what generally industry practice is and what people have generally accepted for now. We hope at some point Austroads will update it, do a second version of the Safe System Assessment Framework to clarify some of this, correct a few things, take all of this and the jurisdictional supplements in. But for now, you just start to, use these to get a bit of an understanding of the practice. And so you'll see that there's fact sheets on how to categorize bicycle facilities, on-road lanes, separated lanes, Copenhagen lanes, and at what point are you altering that from likelihood to exposure or severity, how to assess intersections, how to assess the exposure at intersections, how to think about likelihood of crashes. And then there's one more on the mechanics of doing a safe system assessment on a longer route where you have multiple intersections of life, but we'll get into that sort of stuff in next module. All right, well, I'm going to get started on a little bit of content just before our stretch break and fill the coffee up break. This session is focused on vulnerable road users and thinking about ensuring our assessment adequately thinks about vulnerable road users, pedestrians, cyclists, motorcyclists, and trying to understand what aligns highly with safe system principles for these road users. But in order to do that and to think logically about that within a safe system assessment and provide reasonable recommendations, we need to link it to one network framework, movement and place thinking and the like to understand what are the strategic objectives of areas and roads and streets and what we're trying to do with them. Then we're going to categorize key risk factors for vulnerable road users into exposure, likelihood, and severity, and get a little bit more clarity around that. So I do have some little exercises for you to do during this session. But first of all, I need to just give a bit of high level recap, or for a lot of you, or maybe introduction to this idea of one network framework and movement in place. Now, some of you have amazing expertise in this type of thinking, this strategic network thinking, and certainly you can do courses dedicated to this sort of stuff and really nutting out that thinking. What I'm going to do is a very sort of high level look at it. And we just need to understand a bit of this context, not to necessarily do the assessing, but to make sure any recommendations we make meaningfully connect to the objectives of any area or project. So this idea of movement and place, in a simplistic way, says that we recognize the roads and streets play more than just a movement of people and goods role. They provide a place in some situations. And what do I mean by place? Well, I mean, they provide an area for meeting, for trading, for social interaction, and that vibrancy. So yes, I mean, a lot of people have this view that a road is just a road for moving cars and bikes and trucks and you know, for pedestrians to walk along the footpath, but they are recognized as more than that. And if we look at sort of this movement and place categorization, and you know, you can see many of these are obviously the New Zealand ones, but you can see these different variations on it. Some people call it link and place and the like. But let's take urban, for example, and we see movement corridors on the y-axis, and then we've got place function. Okay, and so high place function, high movement function. Okay, so a very sort of simplistic look at things. You've got these transit corridors, and it's saying these are not places. I mean, they're not. We're not aspiring to have this as a place in that definition we have of place being that area for socializing, trading, and the like. No, we're moving people and goods through that. Now, when I say moving people and goods, don't in your mind think simply about cars. Think about genuinely moving people and goods, okay? And that could be in any way. It could be bikes, it could be public transport, that could be cars, trucks, it could be people walking too. Yeah, so think about holistically about moving people and goods, and that's, you know, very intentional to say movement in a general sense. And then down this other end where we have these high place areas and low movement aspirations or requirements, we sort of thinking these things referred to in this framework as civic spaces. And these are really sort of vibrant areas to sit and have a coffee and chat and, you know, trade and the like. And they're not going to be areas that are designed for moving people and goods through there at fast paces. And of course, then you can sort of start to separate these out, and they get quite complex as you sort of get up into these ones where you're, you know, trying to provide both of those in a reasonable way. As I said, though, like, why do we need to care about this from a safe system assessment? I just talked about the fact that we don't want to try to do everything with a safe system assessment, and we need to put boundaries up on what we do. So the reason this is super important is that we can suggest changes to a project. So they come along with a design and they say, here's what we're thinking, and can you do a safe system assessment on that? And we look at it, and we go through our process of analysing exposure and likelihood and severity. And we come up with a score for it based on the factors that we see in the existing road network and the factors in their design. Their movement and place categorization has no impact on that. In fact, you don't even need to see this for that, all right? But that's not where our assessment ends. Our assessment then provides recommendations for alterations to that project to make it better aligned with safe system principles, to reduce the risk further. And to do that, you can do it in many different ways. So you can significantly reduce speeds and the like. Or you can keep speeds high and you can start to really segregate road users with barriers and blocking off areas to cross and the like. But that's significantly going to impact on the movement and place categorization. So if a project comes along for a safe system assessment and says, well, this is a transit corridor, this has clearly been identified as transit corridor, okay, we know that we're not trying to create this high place value area. And we know that we're trying to move people and goods through that in a quick manner. So if it's a cycleway that's being created, we're going to actively look at ways that we can keep the speed up of the cyclist and keep the speed maintenance so they're not having to stop and the like, okay? But make sure that those are done really safely with thinking about likelihood and severity of crashes. But if, on the other hand, they come and they talk about civic space, well, we're actively slowing everybody down because that's going to align better with encouraging that social interaction, that interactivity, the sense of a place that you want to be and you want to hang out rather than having fast cyclists or fast cars moving around the area. So it's really about how do we make meaningful contributions to this project and recommendations. It's really hard when you're up here, really hard, because you're kind of trying to do everything. And I'll talk a bit more about that. But the first thing I do with strategic planners or a project that's coming in with a safe system assessment is try to say, can you give us something here out of that? Give me something here, one way or the other. Is it more your main streets, more place, trying to get more place out of this, or trying to get more movement out of this? And usually they sort of shy away from that and go, oh no, we want it to be super high place, but we're getting a lot of pressure on movement. Anyway, there are ways we can work with that, but it's nice if we can get a little hint and a little indication. So what I'm going to do is pop up in a second an artistic impression of an existing road environment. But I'm going to say that we've identified it as aspiring to be that civic space. We want high place value out of this area. I'm going to try and change it so it's got high place value. And of course, we want to ensure that it has really high alignment with safe system principles. Now, I popped this picture up just because there's, all the excitement of the tactical urbanism and pop-up infrastructure and things associated with COVID, which was exciting to see that we saw some areas that often sat in very murky territory in terms of what their purpose was, and it was able to just be that little circuit breaker that was needed for people to say, well, it's a civic space, and so started to see those things which clearly helped it become more civic space, as that one there did. Anyway, that's it's just a little bit. So we've got, here we go. Here's our artistic impression, and you always don't take too much out of artistic impressions, but we've got an area. It's got vehicles, pedestrians, cyclists, and 40 km/h speed area, but we've identified it as civic space. And what I'm going to ask you to do, and we're going to mix this in with our stretch break, so you're going to get 5 minutes to do this, is to type into the chat some ideas on how you would change this road environment to give us better alignment with safe system principles, make it safer, but thinking very clearly that this is going to be a civic space. So we want high place value. We want to make it attractive for trade, for socializing, for having a coffee, for having a chat, for hanging out, meeting people and the like, okay? So high and low movement function. Like it's not about moving people and goods through this area. So what could you change? And then of course, the little extra is that I want every time you say something in the chat that you want to change to tell me whether that's going to influence the exposure, the likelihood, or the severity. So you just put an E or an L or an S next to what you want to do. So take, for example, if you wanted to say more lighting, bracket L, reduce the likelihood of crashes. Now, is that going to make this more of a place? Probably not, but you know, I just wanted to give a random example. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes on that. I'll just check if anybody has any questions on the little task you've got.
That looks like people are good and already popping in some answers.
Good, and the first one came in with a E for exposure, which is excellent, well done. So how about that? You can have a stretch and fill your coffee up. We'll get back into it in 5 minutes and I'll then have a chat through this. Thanks. I'm going to get back into this, but this is really wonderful to see so many ideas coming in. Generally, such excellent categorization into exposure, likelihood, and severity. So I'm feeling people are starting to really get their head around this. Now, I'm not going to be able to read everybody's thoughts on this. However, I'm going to go through a few. So immediately straight off the bat, Charles and Shu have come through with ideas to significantly reduce, if not eliminate, motor vehicles in this area. And that is a really fantastic first starting point as soon as you identify that civic space area or anything with that high place value. We know that pushing vehicles through there, it's going to erode the place value of it, okay? And if we've identified that it doesn't have a movement of people in good function, we don't need to be having that through there. Now, practically, there might be some implementation challenges and different things like that, but what a great place to start. So, Kathy, I reckon two prizes there straight off the bat for immediately thinking of that. And we did see some others coming along with very similar stuff. We get in then to, oh yeah, there's a few people who have got in there, no car zone, and identifying that changes the exposure to crashes, and it really does, and it's wonderful when we're able to do that. We get a high safe system alignment, and we get really great place. Then we've got some people with some ideas in there that still does move vehicles through there, but just does it in a much higher safe system aligned way. And we see the idea of shared spaces. So the idea of a 10 km/h shared zone. And that was Yadwanda. So I think a prize there because that's got a lot of great safe system alignment as well, in the sense that We know the speeds will be down. We do know that that creates better place. It's not as good as the complete elimination of the sort of passenger vehicles and the like through there. That reduces the likelihood and severity of crashes. There's less chance of a crash when people are going very slow like that, if a well-designed shared zone. If incidents do occur, the severity is very low. The idea that it might reduce exposure, you can only do that if you've determined that it's going to significantly reduce the number of vehicles going through there. Now, logically, from a logical standpoint, you would say, yes, it will. However, I'm always reluctant as a safe system assessor to jump in and start making traffic modeling predictions. I like to, if they give me traffic modeling predictions and the like, I'm very happy to utilize those. Yeah, logically, in that sense, I think exposure would be altered, but yeah, treat it a little bit cautiously. So then we get into some more ideas people are coming in with, that what we're just seeing is people raising up the movement function of this area. So as we see people continuing to have it as a road with priority, that's indicating more of a movement function for passenger vehicles and buses. Yeah, well, buses are a passenger vehicle, but passenger vehicles and maybe cyclists as well through that area. Whereas the congregating, the trading, the ease of permeability, the ability to hang out is sort of getting less and less. So our place value is starting to come down. And as we like designate pedestrian crossing points, that's a real indication that this is the road for pushing people and goods through there. And people sort of hanging out and crossing and permeating in through and across this road, you are entering into a movement space. So by the addition of that dedicated crossing point, you've made a statement around that fact that this is a movement, this has movement requirements. Now, the reality in most roads is that we do continue to have that movement requirement. So that's a very good and logical thing to do. But I really always resonate back to that starting point of in these very high place spaces of, can we just block it out, pedestrianize the whole area? But certainly these raised crossing points, which some people are suggesting, are going to improve the safe system alignment, definitely. They will improve the place amenity of it compared to this existing one. We could probably go a lot further. Lots of ideas on widening the footpath. Now, widening the footpath, as we talked about, that is going to reduce the likelihood of crashes. It's going to increase place value. It's going to reduce the likelihood of crashes. It's not going to influence the exposure to crashes. The reason for that is the crossing still happens. Now, you might think, oh, well, they don't need to walk on the road then because there's more footpath space. And yes, you sort of, to a degree, right with that. We'd be driven a lot by the crossing here. And unless that's somehow going to mean that less people cross or less vehicles go through the area, then it's just simply a likelihood factor. Removal of parking is an interesting one. And removal of parking, in one sense, reduces the likelihood of crashes. And you can see our little kid there, just drawn on their head, crossing from behind a parked car. And that's the idea that, we'll open up sight lines if we remove that parking. But on the other hand, what that does is it widens the road space and gives an ability for higher speeds and people drive faster through that. So if you are going to remove parking, you want to utilize that road space that you've freed up in a really well thought through, elegant way. And it's a wonderful opportunity for widening these footpaths, creating more space for that, cafes to have areas out there, and different, vegetation and these wonderful sort of things that we could do with that, or creating dedicated active transport lanes, bike facilities and the like. Really good use of those spaces, depending on what your movement in place function, your aspirations of this area is. So removal of parking, in one sense, I would say reduces likelihood, but also increases likelihood and severity based on the increased, potentially increased speeds without any supplementary measures, although I see lots of supplementary measures when people are suggesting that. Just scanning through for anything else.
Ken, can I jump in with a couple that I find interesting?
Please, Kathy.
I like this because you always get a little bit scared and you don't know where I'm going to go.
What Kathy finds interesting is always interesting.
Certainly is. Okay, so Barry's saying restrict access to service vehicles only.
Mm-hmm.
Assign traffic to a different route, rising bollards on entry exit for part of the day, or for authorised vehicles. Thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I like the thinking, and it does have that alignment with, well, interestingly, if you restrict access of larger vehicles and the like, that has, it probably has a minor decrease in the exposure to crashes, because those vehicles as a percentage of all vehicles is kind of low. If you're targeting the fact that those vehicles have an increased chance of involvement of crash with vulnerable road users, because it's often harder for them to see pedestrians, they have the swept path issues, they have these other things, that's a likelihood factor associated with those crashes. So you can kind of reduce small number there and then attribute some of that to likelihood. And the idea of bollarding it off, I think, is a nice, neat way to do that, and you're able to utilize some time features in that. So yeah, some decent thinking there.
And another one that stood out is to change the signal plans at nearby intersections to give less time to vehicles heading for this street, reduces the attractiveness of route to through traffic, therefore reduces exposure. Thoughts?
Yeah. Yep. It's yeah. I mean, the theory is sort of there. It's not going to be as definitive and effective as blocking off this area or the like, or really significantly detracting it. But it's utilizing existing sort of infrastructure that's in place. Certainly, there's some good examples in the UK of the rest on red style treatments or dwell on red, where the signals default to that red position, and through like the high street during high drinking times, so Friday night, Saturday night, and you've got your pedestrian crossings, and you just default your signals to red rather than to green, which pedestrian crossings will sit on green usually until a pedestrian comes up and presses the button. So you swap that around, and it not only has this impact of slowing vehicles through the area as a straight run, but it also just discourages using that at those hours. And so there's similar theory there, so there's some merit to it. And it's just, I suppose, thinking about how you sort of, implement that. Okay. Well, I think people have done really well there. It's such great interaction from this group. I'm going to just show, again, some artistic impressions of this. And, here's one artistic impression. And, immediately with the continuation of the road through, they've taken some, movement into account here. as I mentioned, I don't think there's any need for the actual crossing point there. This whole area easily just sort of shared zone. But you can see the wider footpaths. It's obviously more a place, and it's going to have better safe system alignment. But as that movement requirement increases, as we talked about, you start to see then the this is where we start to separate out road users, trying to retain as much place value by expanded footpaths, seating areas, landscaping, and yeah, you start to build your movement through those separated facilities. If we go to local streets, these become quite an interesting one because we really do have low place value and low movement requirements. Now, you don't tell the local residents we think that their street has low place value because they're not thinking in the whole of community way that we think about place value. It is their place, so they value it highly. But in terms of us thinking about, you know, what we're doing with these environments, I really sort of focus in within the safe system assessment on these facts, that we're at low movement requirement. So we're not actively trying to move vehicles through here fast. And by, you know, any road authority's admission that these are what we call those local streets, the ability to lower speed through these areas or restrict movement is certainly on the table and what I resonate to undertaking safe system assessments and making recommendations on that. So, you know, artistic impression here, we won't do the same exercise on this one. We'll do it for the next one because this is, you know, got some similar characteristics. Not many local streets are this sort of built up, and I mean, some are. But again, we can start to think about lowering the vehicle throughput, blocking off areas, significantly slowing it down, intentionally making it not an attractive rat run for people to use. And if they are going to go through these areas, they're simply accessing houses and going in a very slow manner. We've, you know, increased the safe system alignment significantly for pedestrians, for cyclists, and for passenger vehicles for that matter. And we also happen to have increased the place amenity of these areas as well by doing this, but that wasn't necessarily our primary objective. I mean, it's always a lovely thing. Yeah. But let's look at the really tough ones where we get into these city hubs. Okay, so this is where we've said, hey, this has got high movement requirement and high place requirements. So we're going to try and do everything. And these are the roads that people, you often go, oh my God, they're just trying to do everything with this road. They want it to be a major traffic route, a cycle route, you know, a super vibrant trading area with bars and cafes and shops and lots of pedestrians in the area. And then they go, oh, it's the bus route, the public transport route and everything like that. And you go, oh my God, can we make a decision on what the purpose of this area is? But the evolution of our transport system and the nature of a lot of roads, we still stick into these areas. As I mentioned, I can, if I can try and get them, give me something to work with out of there is good. But if they end up saying no, city hub, then we've got to think about what we can do to get better safe system alignment within that. So let's do that little exercise we just did. And we'll do it for this one where we see an area. We're calling this now City Hub. So we're aspiring to make this high movement, high place. And it currently sits as a 70 km/h speed zone, many lanes, many traffic lanes, got a pedestrian overpass, got some pedestrian fencing in the middle, there, and it's got some pedestrian fencing here. It's got sort of shops over each side. It's a bit hard to see. Now, what would you do? Same little exercise. We're not giving you 5 minutes this time. We'll give you 3 minutes to just think about what would you alter in this road environment, thinking that we want this to be in that city hubs. And of course, put exposure, likelihood, and or severity. I'll give you a couple of minutes on that one, and then we'll have a bit of a quick chat about that before we jump into some other stuff. Okay. Well, again, I'm seeing great stuff coming in and lots of good categorization into exposure or likelihood or severity. So that's making me happy. Sorry, I'm just looking through these as we go. So there's a lot of discussion in here around segregating different road users to their own areas. And that certainly has a lot of merit in terms of giving us that movement ability in a high safe system alignment. So that's certainly, I think, an important thing for us to be thinking about in this category. It's going to influence probably exposure and potentially likelihood as well. As we look to lower the speeds, which a number of you have certainly and rightly put in there, speed limits of vehicles and the operating speed of vehicles, we see a reduction in the severity of crashes and the likelihood of crashes as well. And we certainly would be doing that. There is a bit of a I suppose, misconception sometimes that people think that because this has high movement requirements, that we must keep cars going through at 70 or the like. Well, we're thinking about movement of people and goods through the area, and it'll be in many forms. And in order for us to have high safe system alignment, we are going to have to think about vulnerable road users in the area still. It's got that place value. So we've got to find a more appropriate balance to this. The idea of blocking off pedestrians from crossing and forcing them to use the pedestrian overpass, that probably ticks us a little bit further into the movement and less place. Really a pedestrian overpass or pedestrian underpass is a movement related facility. So when we are trying to create higher place value, the presence of these and the blocking off of the ability of pedestrians to reasonably cross, or forcing them to cross in these ways, doesn't give us much place value, and actually erodes place value usually. So it certainly has high safe system alignment because we've completely separated the conflict point. There's no exposure to conflict if every pedestrian used that crossing, as in there's no exposure to pedestrian vehicle conflict from that perspective. But is it going to align with our aspirations to make this a high place value? Probably not as much as we would like. Lots of good stuff in there. Now, I should have probably put a little clarification on that. If you had the ability to, really redesign a whole area and spend an absolute heap, you can almost create the place on top of the movement corridor underneath. So you're having the best of both worlds there. But that's few and far between at times that we're ever able to get to that point. So thinking about all of the modes of transport. So Joe's got a really good one in there, thinking about that separation, thinking about bus facilities, thinking about raising crossings to reduce severity and likelihood, and altering the speed. So still recognizing that movement. So I think Joe can have a prize for that comprehensive answer there. Question about Wally. I'm not sure if Wally has appeared in any of these, Kathy. That's a good question. I might have to have a look when we pause there.
He's coming up soon. It's okay, but accessibility for the disabled.
Yeah, so that's a good point. I think, again, it's talking about, pedestrian overpass is only going to work for a portion of our community, isn't it? Those who are able to, get up those stairs like a gazelle and travel across. So there's going to be a lot of our community that really struggle to use that. So if we're going to do those facilities, they have to cater for everybody. And often interest, in this way, that the people who want to use those most are the ones that find it hardest to get up those stairs. A little bit of an irony there. So I think that's a good point. But let's have a look. And I didn't get through everybody's comments, but I had a scan of them, and I think there's some really good thinking. I think we've got the concept now. I don't think we need to labor this a lot more. But there's the artistic impression. And I did have a giggle when somebody said some enforcement to get them driving on the correct side of the road. Obviously taken these from some other countries' different documentation on complete streets and the like. But you can see here we've got these wonderful place amenities, and we still are providing some significant movement, aren't we? We've got great cycle facilities. We can move lots of people and goods through those cycle facilities. We can create those public transport facilities with that good movement. We've still got some car movement through there in multiple spots. We're slowing vehicles at conflict points. We've got crossing points, but we still provide that, sort of permeability for pedestrians to not have to go up and down. So generally a far superior place and I would say a superior movement corridor as well compared to the other one, which was focusing all of the movement into simply passenger vehicles. Now, we put these up and it's always easy with an artistic impression, isn't it? And you can transform it and it all looks beautiful. I think, they're good for some people to get inspiration to see what could be done and the like. What we often see is a slower evolving, we evolve a road or a street more in a slow manner to get up to these sorts of things. But, it is good that we can, see these different things slowly sort of permeating in and Christchurch is, a good example. We're seeing some great cycle facilities and it's been a couple of years since I've been to Christchurch. I'm very much looking forward to getting back there shortly for the road safety conference and we're able to see these streets evolving and we're able to sort of pull this thinking out into wider areas. Obviously thinking about then how we deal with intersections and protected intersections, I think are one that is ones that are going to really take off because they have that better alignment with safe system principles for people riding bikes, because we lessen the likelihood of crashes in a number of different ways. The severity probably doesn't reduce a huge amount. If the area was raised or you get, traffic calming on the approaches to these, you've got your severity down as well. But these are simply, where we put the kidney islands out so vehicles turn and they get a good view of the cyclist as opposed to before those where they turn and often cyclists interacting there. And cyclists have that ability to utilize these facilities to make their right-hand turns as well, rather than having to navigate through and get themselves to these right lanes to go out there. Certainly, we've got now the one good example in Melbourne that's operating beautifully. It can send you some video footage of it and ride throughs and the like if you've got a particular interest in it. But I think it's inspired off the Dutch intersection design, obviously. Well, maybe not obviously, but it is inspired off the Dutch intersection design with some tweaks here and there. These urban connectors into transit corridors are areas where you're not actively trying to make these real places for people to hang out, to trade, to congregate, to interact. And by doing that, you can sort of make some acknowledgement that you can utilize those things like pedestrian overpasses, pedestrian, corralling and trying to stop people crossing at different points and the like, if you've got that traffic priority, or even if you've got it as a cycleway. You don't want, you're thinking of it as an area where we're trying to move people through there and it's not that place requirement. But even in these areas, you want to be thinking about the conflict points and the areas where we need to ensure that the severity of crash is within those tolerable limits. So when you have your traffic priority route and it's a high movement requirement and you are moving vehicles through there at speed, well, think about as we have these intersections, and I showed you this one before, but slowing vehicles through those conflict points. So pedestrians and cyclists, we know, are our most vulnerable road users to injury. Severe injury risk, 10% risk at about the 20 kilometre per hour And we've got almost certain death around 50 km/h direct impacts. The young and old even more vulnerable. The young in a different reason for more vulnerable than the old. The old are frail. The young are at heights that cop these nasty severe impacts. So we're sort of aspiring to manage speeds around that 20 km/h where possible for pedestrian volumes. Then if we can't, we will look to separate. So somewhere around the 20. I mean, 30 obviously is starting to get up to where we see that threshold limit. So we're ideally keeping speeds even a bit below that and then looking to separate. And of course, we can separate in many different ways we've talked about. So we've got our Copenhagen style separated treatments for bikes, which are proving really quite effective. We talked about roundabouts being a wonderful treatment for reducing the severity of passenger vehicle to passenger vehicle crashes. Cyclists have some trouble at roundabouts, and that one's quite well documented and researched. Pedestrians, in terms of road safety, it's not as clear with roundabouts. And I think the studies have been more, there's some studies that show pedestrians get some really good safety benefits out of a roundabout without all these extra bits around it. But I don't think that they accurately took into account the exposure of pedestrians and the number of pedestrians that don't use or don't cross around roundabouts. But anyway, these ideas of creating these protected roundabouts are really starting to take off in the Southern Hemisphere. With, again, the Dutch and a lot of European countries have been deploying this sort of stuff in lots of urban areas. And the idea is that you create a facility for the cyclists to utilize around the roundabout. And, they can, if you come up here as a cyclist and you want to turn right, well, you can use that sort of facility and head off down that way. And pedestrians have the ability to cross as well. And you can see on raised platforms. So these are ticking off our likelihood and severity of crash for all road users, really. So wonderful sort of ideas. And there's the Moray Street one, which we give lots of info on. There's a good snippet on that, and certainly again can provide you lots of footage of ride-throughs and the like, if that's something you're particularly interested in. There's some little design specifics to always think about, thinking about your drainage and thinking about the particular arrangements for cyclists and angles that you need to make cyclists turn at and those sorts of things. But in general, it's just a fantastic sort of treatment for the reduction in likelihood and severity of crashes for all road users.
Ken, hello. Tell us a bit about vehicle speeds tending to increase on roundabout exits and how this affects it here.
Yeah, so that's always a concern of vehicle exit speed of roundabouts at these conflict points for cyclists and pedestrians. These particular treatments, again, wonderful for addressing that, because you've got a raised point for that vehicle that is exiting. The ability, if you do really good speed calming on the approach to a roundabout, like that Mildura one I showed you with, they had speed platforms only on the entry. Depending on the size of your roundabout, the ability to gain the speed to go beyond sort of our safe system threshold limits, or even around those 20, is not often there. Some big roundabouts, yes. There's also a little bit of a reduction in the likelihood of crash on exit, because the concentrating on getting into the roundabout and the like for looking for your gap and all has happened. Nonetheless, I do think it's worthy of continuing to consider speeds on exit. And I mean, roundabout design's fascinating and complex, and there's a whole lot of things around the way that the roundabout is designed. We talked about tangential and radial roundabouts, the offset of it, the use of aprons or not use of aprons, and the sort of list continues. But I think, yeah, it's worthy of consideration. Thank you.
Sorry, just one more. Also, depending on the volume, there's a comment here saying I could see cyclists just using the traffic lane and peds crossing diagonally.
Yeah, so we did evaluate this this setup with cameras and monitoring what the cyclists were doing and what the pedestrians were doing, and it was about 80% of cyclists use the facilities provided to go straight through or to make their right or left turn. So it's pretty good in that sense. We still do have 20% who use the traffic lane. That being said, even the ones using the traffic lane have just some significant safety improvements due to that reduced speed on approach and through the area. So I think you sort of accept that. There's certainly traffic impacts to this, but I just really love the local government here as a attitude to it, which was, this is a priority bike route. This is a pedestrian precinct, and all of our council plans and aspirations involve more active transport and less car reliance and dominance. So thanks for your feedback. We agree it'll be slower and more congested in there. In a passenger vehicle, we suggest you, if at all possible, take other forms of transport.
Nice.
It's like, wow, okay. Good. I thought they just actually said it the way that, you know, it is. That's what they want. They write it in strategic plans, and when you get often council who will write it in a nice fluffy strategic plan, when they get to operational actual decisions, and you know, a few people are complaining about these things, they go to water. But no, this council did not do that, and I like it. City of Port Phillip.
Okay, good. Can you also tell us about traversable, mountable roundabout issues as well? There's always some errant vehicles that travel through them.
Yeah, it goes back to our last module talking about disruption of priority. It's a, you know, the more mountable you make it, the more it really is just operating like a four-way stop or a four-way give way, which has significant benefits, don't get me wrong, but yeah, if it's mountable, people will mount it and sometimes just take faster lines through it. So a little bit of a balance.
Okay, Ken, we've got 10 minutes, sorry.
Oh wow.
Okay.
Well, I've got lots of different sort of roundabout designs and things like that, but the principles we talk about and thinking about cycling, and this is an adapted Dutch diagram, really low speeds we can mix. Now, you know, 30 might be upper extremities of this. When you get above that, you really want to separate facilities physically. So with curbing and the like, or with parking is a good way to do it. And then completely off-road separated facilities at the higher speed. Pedestrians, I can do this fairly quickly because I say that if you have enough pedestrian activity to warrant pedestrian priority, it should be raised. Or it should have features on the approach to slow vehicles down. We know that a normal zebra crossing or pedestrian crossing at grade, so nothing to slow vehicles down, it does nothing or sometimes makes things worse in terms of safety. Raising and slowing vehicles is just absolutely critical, so we need to impact that severity. It also helps with likelihood of crash in terms of easier to see. It has lots of spin-off equity issues, advantages. I'll jump through that one. And slowing down vehicles through these intersections, highly aligned with safe system principles for pedestrians as well. And you see there I think that's a important little side note is that when you raise an intersection, your curbing is flush, so your vehicles may track, around that and cut corners and the like very easily. So some bollards out there is a nice little thing to do. Let's talk about motorcyclists briefly then in our last 5 minutes. And I think I can do this fairly rapidly. I like to talk about the 5 S's: sight, surface, sign, strike, and speed for motorcyclists. And when we look at those and we say, well, being able to see motorcyclists or motorcyclists seeing what's coming up and the surface and the signs to warn, inform, guide, there are sort of likelihood factors. Strike, and had to make an S out of that, that's the severity. There's what are they hitting, how are they hitting it, and how severe is this going to be. But speed is our likelihood and severity. Reduces the chance crashes happen and how bad they are going to be. And there's some really good, more recent research into impact severity of motorcyclists, and I've put the reference to that study down there. And it's pretty great study, really, giving us some more indication of what motorcyclists can handle. But in terms of sight, we've got to think that motorcyclists are smaller, hidden behind things. You can see there the motorcyclist popping out from behind that tree. But this just means that the likelihood of crash at intersections and other areas goes up. And when you do a safe system assessment, you have to analyze motorcycle crash potential. It's its own category. You have to analyze it. It's not like you can ignore this. Same with cyclists, same with pedestrians and passenger vehicles. So we're thinking about then, okay, motorcyclists could be hidden behind these signal controller boxes, these bushes, these trees, these power poles, and the like, because they're smaller. The surface is super important for a rider. And so as we're doing our safe system assessments, we're thinking about the likelihood of crashes. If we have surface deficiencies, if we have steel plates in the road, we have manhole covers and these sorts of things. We know that riders lean to take curves. Their center of gravity is shifted. They have 2 small contact patches on the road. So any surface issues, the rider is off the bike. So that likelihood of crash significantly increases for motorcyclists more than other road users with surface deficiencies, often called the canary in the coal mine when it comes to road surface issues. And there's an example of, use of steel plates and the like, which you could imagine a bit wet in the dark, maybe the rider following behind a truck, and we've got a higher likelihood of crash. Signs to warn, inform, and guide and the like are really useful in reducing the likelihood of crashes for motorcyclists. We have motorcycle-specific warning signs, which is where you have issues out there that are particularly hazardous for riders and not so much for others. You can use these specific warning signs. These are used in New Zealand. Some of you have probably seen them. And it's actually quite a neat way to reduce the likelihood of motorcycle crashes. But just consistent, clear, and correct signage is a wonderful way to reduce the likelihood of crashes, and motorcyclists tend to be very alert to signage and take action. Strike. I've got this little video here of the European motorcycle crash test, which is done at 60 kilometers per hour. And you can see this one's at the barrier. You do it at the post. And you can see the motorcycle dummy there. There was so much force that it destroyed the dummy. With the addition of underrun protection, we're able to get that well within tolerable limits. It's not going to be fun to crash into it. They'll probably hurt themselves a bit, but it's survivable, definitely, with some cushioning and some redirection of energy. And what this shows is that we do have possibility to manage energy for riders as well. It's going to be very hard across the entire network, but there are points where we can create a more friendly, less severe outcome for riders. Riders are very vulnerable and the like. However, there is possibility for us to continue to do that. And I can talk to you in a lot of details about barriers and motorcyclists. I've got a particular interest in that. And there's lots we can do. People often talk about wire rope safety barriers as this big danger for motorcyclists. Well, it's really not the case. I mean, riders hit the base of barrier systems. Well, the first thing is we don't have wire rope safety barrier systems in areas of high motorcycle risk. Not necessarily because it was a distinct decision to do that, to not use that barrier type for motorcycle safety. It's a lot of the time you can't. If you have a windy road, looking down on a windy road, and you put a barrier system in there that's in tension, which is a wire rope system, you tension that up, the thing just will pop into the middle of the road. Your posts actually just start to lean as you tension it up. You can't do it. So they're not used on our popular windy motorcycle routes very often. And when motorcyclists crash with them, they're hitting the base of the barrier system, not the wires. The wires have played no role in any crashes. Well, no, I'd say any crash. It's been a couple of isolated ones around across Australia and New Zealand. But I can talk to people more about that if they have a particular interest. Speed can be reduced or improved in a variety of ways. We have advisory speeds, regulatory speed limits. We've got all the local area traffic management, physical infrastructure changes. All of this will reduce the likelihood and severity of crashes for all road users, including motorcyclists. Motorcyclists have limitations, obviously, because of their physical force. So getting operating speeds from 105 to 95, will reduce the likelihood of motorcycle crashes. But severity, when you're in that end, it's levels of death. And so severity still maxes out. We shouldn't lose sight of the reduction in the likelihood of crashes, because that's important as well. But we've got to be realistic in understanding the ability to manage force for riders. So there you go, Kathy. I did run through that last little bit pretty quickly. I apologize, but of course I'm more than happy to chat to anybody who has a particular interest in anything I went through quickly, or if you want me to just send stuff through, just shoot me an email and I can send you some documents or point you at some little videos or the like. Back to you.
Thank you, Ken. So we are at module 3. So there is a quiz to do, quick quiz in today's session. If you haven't yet submitted your module 2 assignment, most of you have, which is terrific, but please do so before the next session, because we aim to review that and give you some feedback before we get into the next session. And I would just ask you please to have a quick sneak peek at module 4 and this section here, which is complete your safe system assessment. If you jump in there, what we've got is a site for everyone. So you should be able to find your name at the end of the site, and just have a look and check that that is somewhere near where you work or where you live, or somewhere you can get to in the next week. So we've based it on the address that you've given us, but you might have moved, or who knows what could have happened. So if there's a site in there and it's not suitable, you can't get to it in the next couple of weeks, then please just shoot me an email and we'll conjure up a new site for you. And I think we'll leave it there, and we'll see you again Thursday.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.